Welcome back to our top end rebuilding series for the Honda CRF250R and RX with the dual overhead cam. Now, in the last video, we disassembled and inspected all of our top end parts. So if you're not to this point yet, go back and watch that video. But in this video, we're going to show you how to put all your new parts back on your bike and get out riding. So with all that being said, let's get started. The first thing we need to do is get our piston ready to install. So I need to install a circlip first. And for me, it's going to be easier to install the circlip that is going to be next to the cam chain. Now, when you put this in, you either want to have this open end facing up or down. So what I'm going to do is start one end in the groove. And I'm just going to use a little bit of pressure with my thumb to hold it in place. And then I'm going to use a small flat blade screwdriver to just help rock this into place. And then just make sure this clip is fully seated in its groove. Now with this arrow or the exhaust side facing forward, I'm going to put the oil control ring to the side. This is going to be 90 degrees of that arrow. You want to make sure that the end of that oil control ring doesn't overlap on itself. Then we can install the lower oil control rail with its gap facing the back. And then the upper control rail, we're going to have the gap facing forward. And then this compression ring, we have a mark. That mark is going to be facing up, and the gap is going to be towards the back or intake side of the piston. Now back over at the bike, we're going to install our cylinder base gasket. Now our gasket has a little bit of sealant where the case halves meet. If your gasket doesn't have that, then you can apply a little bit of silicone sealant on there. We'll set this into place and then install the two dowel pins. After that, we're going to apply a little bit of assembly lube to that small end on the connecting rod, as well as on our wrist pin and to these wrist pin bosses. And then I'm going to take the wrist pin and I'm just going to start it into the piston, set this on the connecting rod and finish installing it. With the wrist pin all the way in, we'll install the remaining circlip and just make sure you have a rag underneath the piston just in case this pops out. You don't want this to fall into the bottom end. Next thing we're going to do is lube up our piston and piston rings. So you can use a little bit of engine oil or some assembly lube. Then I'm going to remove the rag from the crankcase. Now if you got your cylinder replated or you're just using a new one, you want to make sure it's nice and clean. Once you do that, you can apply some assembly lube to it or some engine oil. With everything lubed up, we can install the cylinder onto the piston. Now with a stock cylinder, since this cylinder has a taper to it, you can just squeeze the piston rings and it'll slide right into place. But we have a big bore kit, we don't have this taper anymore. So we're going to use a hose clamp to get around that, and we're just going to squeeze those piston rings down and then slide the cylinder into place. Now when you're pushing the cylinder down, make sure that everything goes smoothly. If something feels like it's hanging up, you want to stop and find out what's going on, because you could possibly damage those piston rings if one of those edges catch on the cylinder and then it bends it. So you don't want to do that. Then when you're pushing it down, make sure you get everything lined up with the dowel pins and fully seated. Then I'm just going to wipe some of this extra assembly lube away from the top of the piston. All right, next we're going to install the cylinder head gasket, and sometimes these come in a kit with a bunch of O-rings and stuff. Make sure nothing is caught in between these layers on them. And then this is only going to sit one way. And then we can install the two dowel pins. Next, I'm going to take this safety wire and hook it back up to our cam chain. And then we're going to install the cylinder head. Now we can install these 3 bolts into the cylinder and cylinder head. Now this one going into the cylinder has a new crush washer on it. And we're just going to thread these in a few turns, but you don't want to tighten them down yet. Now we can install the cylinder head bolts, and we're going to apply engine oil to the threads. Just be careful, you don't want to drop the washers down into the engine. Then we can torque these main cylinder head bolts down in a crisscross pattern in 2 to 3 steps. Then we're going to tighten these main cylinder head bolts in a crisscross pattern to 35 foot-pounds. And then we'll tighten these bolts on the side of the cylinder and cylinder head to 7 foot-pounds. And if you haven't removed this bolt from the cylinder head, you'll want to remove it now. With this bolt removed, we're going to line up our rocker arm shaft with our stopper bolt. There's just a cutout in that shaft. And if it's not lined up, the bolt's going to sit really high. Once it lines up, it's going to drop down into place. And we're just going to leave that there. We'll tip our rocker arms back, and then we're going to install the shims. Again, if you measured anything that was out of spec, you want to get the new shims installed. Now we can go ahead and flip those rockers down, and I'm going to apply a little bit of assembly lube on all of those. Then we'll also apply some assembly lube to the bearing surface where the cam journals ride. After that, we can install the camshafts. You just want to verify your timing mark on that flywheel. Make sure the piston's still at top dead center. And then we're going to line up this exhaust camshaft and make sure its timing marks are flush with the cylinder head surface, and the cam weight is going to be facing down. Next, we'll put some assembly lube on the intake cam and install it. We're just going to set the chain over it for now. And then obviously on this, the cam lobes are going to be facing towards the back of the bike. This dot is going to be facing towards that exhaust camshaft sprocket and slightly up. And then we can set the cam sprocket into place and check the timing marks and adjust it until everything's lined up. At this point, I'm going to remove the stopper bolt and apply assembly lube to our cam cap. We'll set this down into place. Make sure you have both dowel pins in the correct spots. And I'm just going to loosely install that stopper bolt. This stopper bolt, we're not tightening it down until the rest of these are snug down. This one is only going to be 7 foot-pounds. Then we can install the rest of these cam cap bolts and make sure you have the new crush washers on both of these. And then we're going to tighten them in a crisscross pattern to 10 foot-pounds. And we also have some engine oil on the bolt threads. Now we can temporarily install this upper cam sprocket bolt. We'll snug it down. So at this point, we need to reinstall our cam chain tensioner. If you just used a cam chain tensioner tool, you can remove it. I'm just applying some grease to this gasket just so it sticks into place for now. So to get the tensioner in, I'm going to install these bolts and have those ready to go. And then we're going to take the tensioner, or the tension off the tensioner. And I'm just going to go far enough to where I can get one of these bolts started. Now when you're tightening these bolts down, you just want to tighten them by hand until the plunger is pulled all the way in. And that just means the screwdriver is all the way clockwise until it stops. Now again, I highly recommend using the correct tool for the job, but if this is all you have, then you can get by doing this method. We're just using some vice grips to hold the screwdriver in place while we torque down these bolts. You can go ahead and remove the screwdriver. And if you're doing this method, it's not a bad idea. Just to make sure, I would wind it up all the way one more time and let it back out. And that way you know that the plunger is not too far out and putting too much tension on that chain. Now we can install the bolt into the back of the tensioner using our new sealing washer. After that, we're going to install this bolt back into the side of the cylinder head and torque it to 13 foot-pounds. And we also put some Loctite and a new crush washer on that bolt. Now we can rotate the crankshaft 360 degrees. That's going to expose where this other cam sprocket bolt goes. We're going to apply some thread lock to that bolt and torque it to 15 foot-pounds. Then we can rotate the crankshaft 360 degrees again. And I'm just going to double check all of the timing marks, and we're going to remove that upper cam sprocket bolt. We'll apply some Loctite to it and torque it to 15 foot-pounds. All right, next we can install the upper chain guide and torque these bolts to 7 foot-pounds. Now we need to install our valve cover, and I'm just putting a small amount of silicone in the corners on these half moons just to help keep them from leaking. Now we can tighten down our bolts and install the new spark plug. Next, we're going to install the ignition coil. Make sure your spark plug cap is pushed down all the way, and then the plastic connector is going to go to the green terminal, and then make sure you connect the other one at the bottom, and then we can install the 2 bolts. Next, we're going to install our timing covers and reinstall both radiator hoses. Next, we're going to install our intake boot back onto the cylinder head, and then we can reinstall the throttle body. Next, we're going to plug in the engine coolant temp sensor. Make sure it snaps all the way down. That rubber boot is in place. Then we have this clip for part of this harness. Then we can install the engine hangers. So these bottom bolts, we're going to torque these down to 40 foot-pounds, and the top ones will be 24 foot-pounds. Next, we can install the subframe, and when I put this in place, I'm just going to leave the bolts loose for now. And part of that is because we have those steg pegs we're going to be putting on. And once you've verified that the air box is all the way on the air boot, you want to tighten down the clamp. Then we need to start making all of the electrical connections and connect this vent line to our valve cover. Now we can reinstall this cross member and put the bolts back into this cover and the air box. At this point, we'll reinstall both exhausts using new header gaskets. Next, we're going to tighten down the subframe bolts and then start at the front of the header and work our way back for the hardware on the exhaust. Now we need to install our gas tank, so we're going to hook up our wire and hang it to the side, hook up the fuel line. And the electrical connector, and then we also have the clip on the electrical connector we'll push into that bracket. Now we can install the fuel tank. Just don't forget to put this clip around this radiator vent tube. Then we can remove the vacuum cap from the tank. After that, we're going to reinstall the plastics as well as install our clean air filter, reconnect the battery, and install the seat. Now we can top off the bike with coolant, and we're going to add 1,120 milliliters of oil to the engine. Once you have your fluids topped off, you're ready to start the bike. Now before you go ride, I do want to point out a couple things. You want to follow the break-in procedure. On this bike, you're just going to vary the RPM and avoid full throttle starts on that first ride. And then once the bike is cooled down, you want to double check your fluids, both the coolant and the oil, make sure those are topped off. And then after that, you can ride the bike however you want to. And that's all there is to rebuilding your dual overhead cam CRF250R or RX. Now, if you need any parts for your top end rebuild, be sure to get those on our website and subscribe to our channel for more helpful content. Now, for us, we're excited to go see what this 270 kit did to our bike and see how much more power it makes. So we'll see you out on the trails.